mortgage rates near their highest since the turn of the millennium, a limited housing supply in many communities, ongoing supply chain and construction issues. It is perhaps the most difficult time to purchase a home in our region's history. The affordability crisis is further complicated by the fact that many homeowners remain unable or unwilling to sell their in Rockland and Westchester counties, according to the National Association of Realtors. Its monthly cost of a mortgage was $1,000 more per month in 2023 than it was in 2022. And in Putnam and Dutchess counties, it was at least $800 more per month. In both instances, these additional housing costs are almost $10,000 or more a year. For many families, it's totally unsustainable. That's why I've hosted multiple housing roundtables in the district with builders, realtors, advocates, elected officials, and others. As a member of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee of the House Financial Services Committee, I had the subcommittee hold a field hearing right here in Rockland County, focused on the unaffordability of housing and potential solutions looking forward. My staff and I have met constantly over these last 2 years with constituents, advocacy groups, and think tanks to discuss these issues and more. Following these discussions, I'm proud to be introducing today the Revitalizing America's Housing Act. This plan calls for a series of bipartisan reforms and policies that would incentivize construction and reduce unaffordability, would improve the availability of supplies, land, and financing for builders, owners, and purchasers, would address the health and safety of our community's housing, and would vastly improve oversight to ensure resources are being properly utilized and going where they're needed. This rollout includes several concrete steps to tackle the housing challenges of our country. First, it works to address the shortage of housing by incentivizing construction and promoting policies that will alleviate costs and concerns holding back the industry. Specifically, it will work to build on the success of opportunity zones and includes bipartisan policies to help better ensure that available supplies, land, and financing needed for housing growth. Second, it encompasses a number of bipartisan measures to expand existing discounts for first responders, ensure we're not imposing burdens on veterans, rolls back expensive mandates and taxes, and enables better access to financing for homeowners and home buyers. Throughout my term in Congress, I've been proud to spearhead a number of bills to address housing affordability for our heroes. I was proud to introduce the Housing for Heroes Act, which will expand HUD's Good Neighbor Next Door program so that law enforcement professionals, firefighters, and EMTs can access HUD real estate-owned inventory at a 50% discount nationwide. I also joined with my fellow New Yorker Andrew Garbarino and members of both parties last year to introduce the Volunteer First Responder Housing Act, which will provide an $18,000 tax credit to help volunteer first responders offset housing costs. I was thrilled to pass a true 10% property tax exemption for our volunteer first responders as a member of the State Assembly back in 2022. The Revitalizing America's Housing Act builds on that track record by addressing housing opportunities for the heroes who have given so much to our country and our communities. Representing the 17th Congressional District of New York, I'm proud of the fact that roughly 50% of households in this district have a cop, firefighter, or a veteran living in the household. They are truly heroes who serve our communities, and we need to do more to help them with housing affordability. Third, this bill will ensure that we're addressing the health and safety of the most vulnerable when providing housing. This includes a number of measures to study and provide information on potential health concerns, addressing mold and hazards, adequately inspecting public housing, and considering ways to improve housing for elderly and disabled residents. Fourth, this legislation will establish significant improvements to oversight and transparency on the federal level in housing. This includes requiring annual testimony and reporting from the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Office of the Inspector General, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, officials administering government guaranteed or insured mortgage programs, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, and other housing regulators. I introduced a standalone bill earlier this Congress to require annual congressional testimony by the HUD Secretary, and that bill advanced unanimously from the House Financial Services Committee. It is simply unacceptable that prior to her most recent testimony, Secretary Fudge had not addressed Congress in 906 days. The Revitalizing America's Housing Act will address this concerning lack of oversight while also working to guarantee the resources are going where they're needed most. This bill will also promote efforts to explore ways to improve programs at HUD. And finally, it will seek to expand and improve housing counseling and financial literacy programs. The issues confronting our housing system are myriad and manifold. They require a comprehensive set of policy prescriptions to address it. The Revitalizing America's Housing Act will do exactly that. I'm looking forward to continuing work with my colleagues in both parties to advance this important measure. I'm going to keep working on common sense solutions to the issues of the day, including our housing crisis, in order to benefit hardworking Hudson Valley families. This bill, 209 pages long, has over 38 provisions in it. It is intended to lay out a framework for a path forward on housing here in the United States. It is not a one-size-fits-all policy prescription. What works in New York City does not necessarily work in Rockland County or Westchester or Putnam or Dutchess counties. The top-down approach that we have seen in New York, where Governor Hochul has sought to mandate certain legislation on municipalities, does not work. We need to have a collaborative approach working with our partners in local government. We need to invest in critical infrastructure, including roads, bridges, culverts, sewer, water infrastructure. It's why over the last 2 years, I have fought to bring back over $70 million in community project funding to support our municipalities and invest in the critical infrastructure that is vital to building more housing. And we know, living in the Hudson Valley, most of our housing stock is single-family residential, and we need more single-family housing. We do need a variety of housing as well. We need adult planned communities. We need mixed-use, commercial, and residential, especially in our downtown business districts. We need to take advantage of the fact that we do have Metro North and the MTA, New Jersey Transit, here in the Hudson Valley, and make sure that we have accessible housing for people who need to commute into New York City for work. So there's a lot of work ahead, but this plan is a framework and one that I'm very proud we have worked on over the last 2 years as a member of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee. I'm proud to introduce it today. With that, I want to introduce our Rockland County Executive, Ed Day, who has been doing a great job here in the county, not only working to reduce the cost of living, but working to address the housing crisis that we have seen throughout the Hudson Valley. And I know he has some thoughts on this as well.
Thank you very much, Mike. You know, just real quick, as it relates to the process with the solving the problem, truer words have never been spoken. I want to thank the Congressman for sharing that with us. I'd like to also extend my sincere thanks to Congressman Waller for his commitment to tackling this crisis alongside us. A collaborative, coordinated approach from local to federal levels is the only way to make meaningful progress in an undeniable housing crisis families are facing across this great nation. A recent report by the Regional Plan Association projects that without intervention, home prices over the tri-state will increase 25% over the next decade. The alarming reality is something that we in Rockland know all too well. We have a housing deficit of 4,200 units for those making under $60,000. Additionally, the median household income in Rockland is $100,000, which qualifies for a $260,000 home loan. But the average price of a single-family home is now approaching $700,000. This is unsustainable and it's unacceptable. This is where we feel that I believe that everyone should have a shot at safe and attainable housing. But we are not talking about giveaways, but rather establishing opportunities. I commend the Congressman for his comprehensive plan that includes a wide range of actions, from expanding housing opportunities for first responders to doubling the maximum amount of state and local tax deductions or the SALT tax for married couples. While this administration is taking action to address this crisis, most recently announcing the redevelopment of the same building across the way from us to provide much-needed workforce housing. But we cannot solve this crisis alone. All levels of government will need to do their share to solve this crisis. And I want to thank Congressman Lawler once again for doing just that by helping us build a future where every Rockland resident has access to safe housing. Thank you again, Mike.
One thing I want to touch on, the county executive talked about the shortage of housing here in the county. We are 6.5 million units under build nationwide. 6.5 million units. So the housing crisis is becoming more pronounced by the day. And obviously, in order to address it across the country, we need to be building more housing and addressing the needs of local communities and working with them tirelessly. As Ed pointed out, the average home price now in Rockland is about $700,000. In Westchester County, it's 1.1 million. For so many families, working families, young families, folks just starting out in their careers, they cannot afford to live in the Hudson Valley because we have seen such a spike in prices. And so this is an issue that we have to address across the board. With that, I want to introduce East Fishkill Town Supervisor Nick D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Congressman. Thanks for having me here. And thank you for this legislation, so very important. And thank you for always thinking about our first responders, our heroes that you said they are, our firemen, our policemen, our veterans. We need to help them, and this legislation will do so. You know, look, we all know we have a housing crisis in all different communities. In Dutchess County, where I'm from, even there, we are looking for different housing stocks, different housing varieties. We need help from our state, federal representatives. We can't do it alone. Us on the local level don't have the resources to do it. And one thing that we lack always is infrastructure. In a community like mine, a more rural community, we lack water and sewer infrastructure. Congressman Lawler has been there for us, helped my town get funds to expand our water and sewer districts, which can help expand our housing needs. So I want to thank him again. I want to thank you for doing this, and we'll be here to help you and support you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Next, I want to introduce HGAR Westchester Regional Director, Crystal Hawkins-Siska, to come up and say a few words.
Thank you so much, Congressman Lawler. You know, I deeply and sincerely thank you for being a part of this legislation and spearheading housing as a top issue and keeping it at the forefront of your political agenda. As a real estate agent, I am sitting at the forefront, on the line, seeing every day people find the dream of home ownership and housing slipping from their hands. This important legislation puts this back into the power of Americans to have a home. His legislation actually makes it more possible for my daughter, my stepdaughter, to come back home and live in the neighborhood where she grew up. In addition to, when you look at components of this legislation with capital gains tax, I highlight that it impacts everyday Americans, not the top elite. It impacts my mother-in-law, so that when she sells her home, she's not hit so heavily with taxes that she doesn't have enough to buy another home and continue to live. So I thank you and applaud you. We're looking forward for this to be taken to the next level, and that the American, what is called the American dream, is really the American promise.
Thank you, Crystal. And one of the issues that having served in the state legislature and now in Congress on the Housing Committee in Albany and the Housing Committee in Washington, is the simple fact that housing policy for years has been an afterthought, and the general approach has been to just try and throw more money at it, to cap rents and hope that solves the problem. But what we've seen, for instance, in New York City under the draconian rent control laws, is that it has created its own crisis. There are 50,000 vacant units in New York City under these rules and regulations. That is creating a challenge as people cannot find housing in New York City and in major cities across the country. So we have to have a more common sense approach to how we reduce cost, both when it comes to home ownership and rent, and make sure that there's more housing stock available. And that is paramount. I want to introduce Yorktown Supervisor Ed Lachterman.
Good morning, and I would also like to thank Congressman Lawler, because the housing crisis is not just housing. It's a linchpin. It's something that is creating a block for a lot of things. So when people can't afford housing, when they have to scrape and scrimp, it hurts the economy. People can't buy the things they need. They can't, they have to make decisions over what to get, their medications, clothing for the kids, new sneakers, whatever it will be. But the main thing that we experience is that a lot of the towns, villages, cities, not as much in the cities, but they weren't designed for the housing needs of today. And one of the things, as Nick brought up, was that the infrastructure needs to be looked at, but not just sewer, not just water. We need to really look at the roads. DOT needs to realize that some of these major routes were set up for the plans of the 70s, and our population changes have really created a influx of people that need to have proper roadways. We deal with this a lot on a town board level, where people are coming in with developments, and you get a lot of people who are not in favor of it. And then there are people who say, oh, it's just NIMBY people, not my backyard, I don't want it. But it's not that. There are legitimate concerns. What about stormwater runoff? What about sewers? What about water? What about our roads? How can our roads handle another 1,000 units that are proposed in a small area? So we need to look at it globally. I think that Congressman Lawler has been doing a phenomenal job at that. I appreciate it. He comes to our areas, he looks at it, he asks the questions, he does the homework, and I think this bill shows it. And I just thank him and his staff for all the effort that went into this, and look forward to seeing it pass through Congress.
Okay, in conclusion, this bill is something that I've been very passionate about for the last 2 years in putting together. And as I said, it has 38 different provisions and addresses everything from opportunity zones, capital gains, to insurance, to infrastructure issues, cost of construction, the cap on salt, lifting that, supporting our veterans, our first responders, energy mandates that are jacking up cost of construction, dealing with Superfund sites, dealing with federal land, and utilizing that for building affordable housing, oversight of HUD, and really making sure that we are addressing the safety and wellness and accessibility of affordable housing across the country. So there is a lot of work here, a lot of work product that has been put together. And I look forward to really championing this bill and advancing it through Congress. I believe fundamentally, housing is one of the most important issues facing the country. It is critical to lifting people out of poverty and into the middle class. Home ownership is vital to that. And obviously, finding affordable rent for folks is critical. We have to reduce the cost of housing. Thereby, we have to reduce interest rates. We have to bring down the cost of construction, the cost of taxes, and the ability for folks to fully deduct their state and local taxes again. So there's a lot of work ahead, but I think we are on the right track with this bill. And so with that, happy to take any questions that we have from reporter Jessica.
Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
So I have two questions. Bear with me, I'm very cold. So can you give us a sense of whether any other members of the New York delegation have signed on already as co-sponsors? My first question, and then I wanted to ask about Mayor Adams's City of Yes plan. If it shares one aspect of what you're talking about, which is increasing housing supply to lower overall housing costs. What do you think of his plan?
Yeah. So we just introduced the bill today, so we're working to get co-sponsors on. A number of provisions have been introduced as standalone bills by some of my colleagues. So I'm sure they support certainly key provisions within this framework. And we will be working to build consensus over the coming weeks and months because, again, I believe fundamentally this is something Democrats and Republicans should be able to agree on. Housing is a critical issue to the country. We are 6.5 million units underbuilt. New York City has 50,000 plus vacant units right now sitting because of the draconian rent control laws that have been put in place. And while they're requiring landlords to upgrade the apartments, they're not allowing them to recoup the cost. And that really creates a crisis because what they're deciding to do instead is leave the apartment vacant, take the tax write off. You can't blame them if they're going to lose, tens of thousands of dollars on bringing the apartment up to code and not be able to recoup the cost in rent. And so the question to me is, how do we create a system that increases supply, because it is at the end of the day basic supply and demand. We have a lot of demand, and even though New York leads the nation in out-migration, the Hudson Valley continues to grow, and so we have a housing shortage. You see, not just with interest rates going up, how that has driven up the average mortgage cost by $1,000 a month in Rockland and Westchester, but it has driven up price because you look at the last 4 years, the average home in Rockland County went from $400,000 to $700,000. The average home price in Westchester went from $700,000 to $1.1 million. That is unsustainable for working families to be able to afford purchasing a home. I'm 38 years old. I purchased my home back in 2015. And I paid $575 for it. It's now estimated to be over $800,000. Now, good for me if I'm looking to sell, but if you're trying to buy, that's very different. So we need to increase the housing supply. I think we need to look at every idea. I'm not against the mayor's concept, but I think the point that is critical is that what works in New York City does not necessarily work in the Hudson Valley. And the governor's approach was heavy-handed, and it was trying to do a one-size-fits-all approach to housing, which does not work. So the objective here is to reduce barriers, to incentivize localities and developers to work together to actually build the housing supply that we need.